We don't hurt somebody else.
But it's predictable. It's a 100% certainty. Crack addicts will kill to get more crack.
That's the big fear, and his arguments make sense to lots of people. Drugs are just different than alcohol. So let me ask Harvard economist and libertarian Jeffrey Miron, what about his claims? 100% the crack addict will kill.
The claims that he was making, the claims that other drug warriors make, are just such grotesque exaggeration of the facts. It's hard to believe anybody can say them out loud. There are no data that support anything like that. Of course, some of the claims do occur once in a while, but of course they occur for alcohol as well as for the illegal drugs. They're basically just making up facts. They're cherry-picking selective statistics.
This is logical. The crack addict will kill to get more crack.
Crack has been out there for 25 years. It's available in every city. If it were going to cause that kind of violence, we would have basically seen everyone living in cities dead by now. Of course, that's not true. So those claims are just fanciful.
And just to go back to that chart, I was impressed by this, that if I had become convinced that crack was this special drug that really hooked people, but then what explains this?
So what explains that is that lots of people try it, okay, and they realize it's either not that much fun, it's not that interested, or they have some concerns about negative side effects, and they stop. Most people who use all sorts of risky things in their teens and early 20s stop doing them for lots of things as they get older.
Sean Hannity said the Dutch marijuana use, after Holland legalized it, it rose 250% from 84 to 92. I didn't catch his time period when he said that to me, but...
So his time period doesn't correspond to when they actually liberalized their policy. Their use rates have indeed gone up and down, but they're currently about half the use rates in the United States, even though they have virtual legalization and we have this draconian policy. So it doesn't support his claim at all, just the opposite.
So even though Holland's this place where all the American tourists go because they can smoke marijuana, not worry about the cops, fewer Dutch people smoke than Americans.
And in particular, Dutch youth don't smoke nearly as much as American youth seem to do.
If it were legal, more people would try stuff, right?
I suspect lots of people would occasionally try it or would be curious, but the vast majority wouldn't continue. If they really were curious, if they really cared, they would already be using it because it's easy to get if you have any serious interest.
So why is this such an unpopular idea when I say legalize it?
I think people get scared. I think people get brainwashed by the kinds of numbers that Mr. Hannity was throwing around, that the DEA throws around, and they get used to the status quo and they don't ask the questions.
The DEA has all these numbers from their website. 95% of Americans do not use drugs. This is success by any standards.
If the DEA took a statistics course in college, they would flunk. They make the most outrageous claims that are completely unsubstantiated by the facts that they throw out there.
Thank you, Jeffrey Miron. Next, we cover the horrible things happening on our border.
The violence is real and the stakes high.
We know that drugs in Mexico are controlled by the cartels.
And with drugs comes the violence.
An eruption of deadly ambushes, street shootings, home invasions, assassinations, kidnappings, and even decapitations.
Assassinations, kidnappings, chaos. I say none of that would happen if drugs were legal. We'll debate that when we return.
Stossel is brought to you by the Capital One Venture Card. What's in your wallet?
Over 8,000 casualties have been violently claimed in cartel hotspots across Mexico. There were 11 homicides on a single Sunday in January, as an example. 7 that Monday, 6 on Tuesday, 9 on Wednesday.
20,000 people killed in the past 4 years. It's a death toll equal to September 11th times 6. Why is this happening suddenly? Well, the cocaine trade used to be headquartered in Colombia. Then our government funded narcotics police there and sprayed their fields with herbicides. The DEA announced it was a big success. They'd cut way back on the Colombian drug trade. They probably had, but so what? All we did was squeeze a balloon. The cocaine drug trade moved across the border to Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador. And because of a crackdown on smuggling routes in the Caribbean, dealers moved to Mexico to smuggle all kinds of drugs. So now the new president of Mexico is squeezing the balloon. The result?
The police and military in Mexico say they're trying to crush the country's violent cartels, but the drug lords aren't going quietly. They've murdered thousands of people in Juarez alone just in the last few years.
The criminal syndicates that we're fighting against are highly flexible paramilitary organizations.
Some raise money by kidnapping people.
People just disappear like they never existed.
It sounds awful. And we're joined again by Harvard professor Jeffrey Miron and also Mary O'Grady, who covers Latin America for the Wall Street Journal. So, Mary, you've lived in Mexico and you travel throughout the region. What's your conclusion?
Well, I think what you have here is the result of prohibition and high demand. And what you get from that is very powerful organized crime networks. I mean, we had that during alcohol prohibition in this country, and you have it now in Mexico. An extremely powerful organized crime unit that overwhelms the state.
Sometimes the cops, legitimate cops, are asked, you want lead or silver?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
In Spanish, you say plomo o plata. But that's basically saying, look, you can either take a bribe or you can take a bullet. But we're going to, control this territory. And, a lot of the Mexican police, it's not just them that's being threatened, it's their families as well.
And now in the United States, we're decriminalizing in some cases. And you say instead of making it better at the border, this makes it even worse.
Well, my argument there is that if you don't have penalties for using the substance, but you have penalties for production, transportation and distribution, then the incentives for the cartels to reach their customers are very high. So, in fact, they have a strong demand, they have lots of flow, so it's kind of like what I call a stimulus plan for Mexican gangsters.
Stimulus plan for Mexican gangsters. If we just had a stronger government in these countries, maybe then they could eradicate this.
Well, you mean the way we have in the United States? The idea that you're ever going to stop supply when, as I say, you have very strong demand goes completely against the laws of physics. I mean, the producers are going to do everything they can to get their product to the consumers. And in an environment of prohibition, they're going to try even harder because there's more value in the product than if it were legal. There wouldn't be as much value. They wouldn't have those incentives.
And Jeffrey, you say if drugs were legal, the crime would just go.
The crime would go. When you drive a market underground, people can only resolve their disputes with violence. That's exactly why we see this violence in Mexico. It's why we see it in inner cities. It's been true of drug prohibition for decades. It's been true of every product that governments have tried to prohibit. And the notion that we can escalate our way into some better place has been falsified for 100 years. We escalate and escalate and escalate, and it just makes the problem worse. It makes there be more crime because interfering with the cartels, if anything, makes them more violent rather than less violent.
Mary, you're not in favor of legalizing all drugs.
Well, I mean, I think that we live in a welfare state, and that means that, for example, until we privatize the sidewalks, if you have lots of drug users lying on the sidewalks, we are going to have to collectively do something about that. So my only point is on the point of legalization. I don't think the argument that everybody should be allowed to do what they want, the libertarian argument, holds water in a welfare state such as we live in.
And Jeffrey, your answer to her, people on the sidewalks?
Well, I don't think the number of people on the sidewalks, the number of people who misuse drugs is going to change materially. I think most of the people who use drugs irresponsibly are the same people who ignore prohibitions, and so they're already having these problems. Look at the history of tobacco. We reduced tobacco use enormously in this country and many other countries without ever prohibiting it, with public health initiatives, with education, to some degree with taxes, but not by outlawing it. Exactly the same approach would work to the best possible extent with the currently illegal drugs.
Thank you, Jeffrey Miron and Mary O'Grady.